Hello. Um, this is going to be a very long video, so I'll just jump right into general housekeeping stuff. Who am I? What is this video about? Who's it for? All that. So I'm Vanilla. Most of you probably know me from Wanikani forums since I'll be posting this on there. But I've been learning Japanese for about 5 years now, a little under 5 years. And I would say I've achieved a pretty decent level of literacy. And, I've experienced reading. I've read about 65 books. Not very much manga. I've only read like 40 something volumes of manga, 44 or so. I've read a handful of light visual novels as well. I've studied this for over 6,000 hours at this point, SRS over 20,000 words. And yeah, I spent a lot of time doing this. And I decided to make this video, which is going to be not only my journey and everything I did, but that'll be followed up by general advice and reflections I have on those things that I did, so that other people might be able to learn from my mistakes, or maybe hear a couple pieces of my advice and use it in their learning, so that they can have an easier time than they otherwise would have. It may sound a bit self-centered, but I think I have a couple things I can hopefully offer some people learning Japanese who are either just starting out or maybe at that more intermediate level. Who's this video for? So this video is going to cover reading. So if you're not interested in reading as much, or you're not planning on learning how to read to a high level, this video is not really for you. It's not going to have much advice that you would be able to use, and this video is especially going to be for people who want to reach a very high level in reading. So we're talking close to near native. And you plan to read novels and such. And why am I making it? Again, I want to maybe help other people. Whenever I was learning, I didn't have anything like this. I had a couple videos I had seen of people doing things like this, and it actually helped me quite a bit, if not from an advice standpoint, at least from a motivation standpoint. And I wanted to kind of do the same. So this is going to be a very long video, which is why I made it a video rather than a giant wall of text. So if you want to listen to it in bits, or while you're in the car or whatever, be my guest. I'm not going to have any visuals up on the screen that you would need to look at otherwise. Alright, so jumping right into it. I initially learned Japanese because I was reading a light novel called Orishira, which had the translation project dropped. And I decided I was going to learn it. I was going to learn Japanese myself, so I could read that book. And I failed miserably, like many people do when they learn Japanese. They come in with expectations of how hard it's going to be or how much time it's going to take. And they're in that honeymoon phase and drop out of that honeymoon phase, and all you're left with is boring study time. And I stopped learning after hitting about level 17 on Wanikani, which was the first thing I did. So a couple months of learning. And after going to Japan for the second time, I had a moment where, I felt like I was struck by lightning. And I was like, wow, I really want to live here one day. And I currently am. I really want to live here one day, and I really want to learn the language. So after going back and entering university, I did exactly that. So I started learning 20 words a day on Wanikani. I picked Wanikani back up from like level 17. 20 words a day, which ended up being full speed. I did not know at the time that was full speed. It was just pure coincidence that I wanted to do 20 words a day, and that's what it turned out to be. And I started reading Taikim's Guide. At the time, I also tried learning through Genki. I bought the first book and started working through it, but it felt very, how do I say, had a lot of fluff, and I really just wanted the explanation. I wanted general example sentences, and Taikim fit that a lot better. So I skimmed through Taikim. I did not read it extensively. I definitely did something you would describe as skimming through it. That is to say, I knew, for example, that conjugations for verbs would exist, but I wouldn't have been able to do them for you. I wouldn't have been able to tell you, hey, this is te form and this is how you make it. I could just tell you, oh, there is something called the te form, and usually the verbs will end in te or de. Kind of that level of skimming. So I did that, and I did Wanikani up to about level 25. And then I noticed that they recommended, you could start reading, like, easy stuff. So I picked up Yotsubato, which I believe is a very popular beginner manga. And I started reading that, and I was very frustrated. There was a lack of kanji. I'd been learning kanji up until that point on Wanikani. So I felt like I really wanted to use the things I had learned, and I wasn't a huge fan of Yotsubato to begin with. So I switched over to a visual novel. The visual novel name was Hoshiori Yume Mirai, and it is very long. The whole entire script is about the length of 17 light novels, to put in perspective, if you do all the routes. I did a couple routes. I didn't do all of them. And I did this at level 30 or so. I switched over. And I was still doing Wanikani alongside this, and I had my visual novel, which I would hook up to a text hooker. At the time, nowadays people use like a different one. I used ITH, Interactive Text Hooker, at the time, and this was like back in, 4 years ago. And you would hook the program up, and it would basically pull out the text that was in the game at the time. So whatever was in the current text box, you'd be able to pull it out into a different program, and with that, more specifically, you could run it through a parser and kind of use what was like Yomi-chan at the time, and just hover over each piece that you didn't understand, namely words, and get the definition for them on hover. So I did that, and I was adding a lot of words I didn't know to Hoho SRS, which was basically like Wanikani, but you add your own words. It's like a mixture of Wanikani and Anki, is the best way to describe it. The interface is just like Wanikani, but you add words like you do on Anki. So when I was first reading, I had a lot of difficulty. I actually had never learned katakana before I started reading Hoshiori Yume Mirai. So I learned katakana by coming across words that had katakana in them. As crazy as that sounds, it is crazy actually. It doesn't just sound crazy, it is ridiculous. I would learn katakana as I came across, or as I learned words that had the katakana in them. I also didn't know verb conjugations, as I said, so I would hover over the word and it would tell me what verb conjugation it was. And that's how I would learn verb conjugations. And then I kind of eventually came to the realization, like, oh wow, passive and potential for this kind of verb are the same. And kind of had to naturally come to those realizations and naturally kind of internalize the patterns. Kanji lookup was another big issue. It was tough at the time, but with the visual novel, luckily it didn't even matter if I knew the kanji because I could just hover over it. So really that medium made things a lot easier compared to manga. So yeah, and I'll jump more into that in the reflection section about all this stuff. But continuing on with my journey, I add my words into Hoho, and I realized that my vocabulary was very lacking. Everything was lacking at the time, but my vocabulary was particularly frustrating. So I went ahead and added words from the Core 10K. If you don't know what the Core 10K is, basically it is supposed to be a general list compiled of 10,000 of the most common words. I don't know across what genre or what medium, but that's what it's a list of words that are supposed to be common. And I learned about 1,000 words from that, again, while doing WaniKani. So I kept doing this, where I had my words from the Core 10K, I had my words from the visual novel, and I was doing WaniKani and doing my grammar, whatever. Although for grammar, usually I would look things up as I came across them, and that was about it. Occasionally, I did add sentences to Anki that would have the grammar, and it was like highlighted, and I'd have a English translation on the back of the card, and I would highlight the equivalent part of the grammar on the back of the card as the grammar that was highlighted on the front of the card. I didn't do that too extensively. It was a very short-lived thing, but that was something I did. So yeah, I continued this kind of pattern up until level 55. And on level 55, I essentially stopped learning WaniKani words. I continued learning the kanji, but I stopped learning the WaniKani words actually. And the reason was because a lot of those WaniKani words at level 55 and up were not more common than simple kana words that I was coming across all the time. So I since I was actually reading at the time, I decided it would be better if I just picked words that were actually going to be relevant to me. So I stopped learning WaniKani vocabulary. Still haven't learned them to this day. I've actually learned them, but not on WaniKani. And I did more words from the Core 10K. Namely, I think I did a lot of kana words. And words that aren't usually written in kanji that you can expect to see. Maybe some onomatopoeia words, all that kind of stuff. So I finished WaniKani. Again, finished. I didn't actually finish all the vocab, but whatever. In the summer of 2018. So this was about 3.5 years ago or so. Yeah. And then I started reading my first light novel after that. So my first light novel, if you remember at the start of the video, I casually mentioned that I wanted to read a book called Orishura. That was actually the light novel I ended up going with. So I found that light novel on FloFlo, and I'll explain what FloFlo is here in a second. And I saw it on FloFlo, and I was like, oh, well, this is a good opportunity to read the book that I initially started learning Japanese for. At the time, it wasn't really my long-term goal anymore. It was the initial start, but I just had enjoyed reading at this point. I just enjoyed learning at this point. And it wasn't the goal, if that makes sense. So what FloFlo is, though, is it's a site, now Kohida and it will take it takes the books it has on its site. It doesn't have every book, but it takes the books it has on its site and it generates word lists for them. It basically generates a list of all the words that are in the book. And in addition to that, it has the frequency at which they appear in that book. And there's other tools where you can mix and match or compare word lists from book to book. And it has a built-in SRS tool where you can click to add any of those words from the book into an SRS system similar to WaniKani. So I did that, and I would learn every word that appeared twice or more in Orishura Volume 1. And you have to think, at this point, I'd done WaniKani, learned most of the words on there, like 5,000 something. Learned probably a couple thousand words off WaniKani, Core 10K on my ho-ho. And I got my ass kicked. So that first book, I did 20 words a day. It took me 2 months, almost exactly 2 months. I had 1,200 words added that were just words that appeared twice or more. Now keep in mind, the amount of unique words in a given light novel is usually about half of them are frequency 1 words, which means they only appear once in the book. And that's half of the unique words. 1,200 of the unique words I learned appeared 2 times or more. So there was a lot of words I did not know in the book, and there's a lot of words I didn't know in the book that I didn't end up SRSing. There were probably more words left in the book that I didn't know than words that I ended up SRSing. I wouldn't be surprised if there's like over 1,500 words I didn't know left in the book. Probably more than that actually. But I brute forced it. I read through it. Some days I only did a few sentences. That's an exaggeration. Some days I only did like a page or two, not a few sentences. But I would do my 20 words a day, and I would stop whenever I came across the 20th word I had learned for the day. Basically, I would only read as far as I had learned words. And then sometimes when I'd finished, if it wasn't particularly satisfying for that read for the day, I would go off and read, my visual novel, and I would not add words on there, but I would just read through it. And I continued this. And on my second book, it took me, I think, about 1 month. So the time got cut in half. It went from 2 months for one book down to 1 month. Again, just after finishing that first book. And I repeated that again. And I repeated that again. On the third book, I felt like I had hit a breakthrough where it wasn't brutal anymore. There was a time where I could learn the words for the day and then sit in my bed and read on the Kindle and rely on the Kindle dictionary, which was pretty shit, honestly, to read through and understand that stuff for the day. It wasn't optimal, but it was possible. And that was at my third book for that series. Finished that entire series. It was like 16 volumes at the time, 15 maybe. It has 17 out now. It's 1 volume away from finishing. Very excited for that last volume. And moved on to another book. I think I did like Hagami no Kojo, or Konbini Ningen. And then I moved on to different books. And eventually, I think it was pretty early on in the Orashura series, it was like maybe at like 5th or 6th book, I started learning not only all frequency 2 words, but all frequency 1 words that would appear in the next book or two. So for example, if the word, if we had a word A, that would appear once in the book I was reading, but also once in the book I was going to read next, I would learn that word. And thanks to the tools on FlowFlow, I was able to know which words those were, essentially. There were misparses, of course. It's not a perfect site, but it is a lot better than nothing. It was a very big help. So I'm very appreciative to Rhinus and his work on that. So I continued this pattern. Frequency 2 plus overlapping frequency 1 was my big thing for a while. And then I hit like a wall. And my impression at that time was that this wall was just how ridiculous it was to try and learn all the words. It felt like there was just always more words. Like no matter how many books I would read, it was like there was a word that would just appear that had never appeared before, even in like the past 10 books. And I would have to learn it. And it was like those words never felt like they diminished. It was always like there was like this set amount of them, and I couldn't get over it. And in the face of that, I was like, okay, well, maybe it's time. My reading ability is this far. Maybe it's time I should go like get an experience with like more real Japanese. And I went and watched Terrace House. I watched Terrace House with Japanese subs, and I watched a lot of that. And I watched like other Japanese dramas and stuff because I wanted to get a feel for more natural spoken Japanese. Even though I know dramas. Well, Terrace House is a bit of an exception, but dramas aren't necessarily the most natural, but they're probably better than light novels. And I did that for a while, and I finally was like, all right, it's time. I want to get better at reading. It's time to go back to reading. It's time to finish what I started and try to get to a high level in reading. And I kept doing my frequency 1 plus overlapping frequency 2. And watching the dramas and all that, I built up a collection of books I wanted to read, and eventually I hit a point where the amount of frequency total amount of words I didn't know in a book was like less than 300, and that was the turning point. So that was where I decided to start learning every single word in a book. And I did that for a while. And I kept learning just every single word in a book. And I would change that for maybe things like Shinsekai Yori. I couldn't do that. There were too many dang words in that book. But yeah, like Shinsekai Yori and Ningen Shikaku were the only ones I didn't learn every word for, I believe, as of recently. And Ningen Shikaku was for a different reason. It wasn't that there was too many words I didn't know in that book. It was actually that there was a lot of outdated terms. And I'll go into how I knew... Sorry, his friend just sent me a message. I'll go into how I chose not to learn some of those words here in a second. But some of those words I had decided not to learn for certain reasons. And yeah, and now I am here. The last book I read was not a light novel, it was a regular novel, and usually those are easier. Oh, sometimes it depends on the book, honestly. But in that most recent book, I had like 9 words I didn't know, I think. So I'm definitely getting to a point where I can see the end, right? And I can see the end. And of course, most of those words, I think all but one of them, I was able to get without context. Funny enough, the one that I couldn't get without context, or even with context, was it wasn't even kanji, it was like a katakana word. It was like from some French word. And eventually, as of recently, I switched over to Anki. So I don't use Kohi anymore for a couple reasons. Biggest one was just that there weren't the books on there that I wanted to read anymore. I kind of started reading books fast enough to where some days I would read, a book in a day. I think my record currently is like 2 books in one day, for just a series that I had enjoyed at the time. So it's nothing wrong with Koei necessarily, but it was a lot easier for me to just switch over to Anki so I could have more customization with what I want. I switched over to Anki, and with that, I started learning all the kanji forms of the words that I would come across if it was available on JMDict, which is just a dictionary. I don't mean to confuse you with that. And currently so the reason I started doing that was because there's a lot of words that I would learn with kana that would eventually just come across with kanji anyway. So it was like I had to learn with kana, and then I had to learn it with kanji again afterwards. So I was like, well, let me just learn it with kanji from the get-go. The ones that are really, really never written in kanji don't even appear on JMDict in kanji, so I don't have to worry about that. But yeah, as of currently, I recently checked, I have like 3,100 kanji or so in my deck that I've SRS'd. Obviously, it's not including any of the names I've come across. I've never SRS'd like a single name in my life. I probably will eventually. But yeah, and then 20,000 something words. And here I am. So, 4.5 years later, almost 5 years later, here I am from about when I initially got back into it in university. And, I had my little stint to begin with, but it is what it is. So now is the time for reflection. And what I would advise you guys to do. So the first thing, grammar. Let me take a drink before I get into this. So grammar. I did not learn grammar basically at all before getting into reading. Yeah, there's really no excuse for that other than I didn't feel like it. Looking back, that was not the optimal route. There is no reason not to learn your verb conjugations. There's no reason not to learn katakana before you read. I just did it because I was dumb. I just didn't want to do grammar. And you don't have to. You can do it the same exact way I did. I like feel perfectly comfortable with grammar nowadays. You kind of hit a point where like the max grammar level you need compared to the max vocabulary level you need is a very big gap. So you're going to realistically, you're going to basically max out your grammar long before you max out your vocabulary anyway. And it'll just happen naturally. Just by seeing the grammar so much, it'll happen. So there's no reason to feel like you have to get it down pat from the get-go and go hard on grammar, or else you're going to fall behind. One exception to that is I have been presented with some older texts, and I couldn't read those for shit. Like Ningen Shikaku and stuff was fine. That wasn't any problem at all. I'm talking like old stuff that uses like weird grammar. I don't even know what it's technically called. But if you are going to read those things, yeah, you're going to have to study more intensively. Otherwise, as far as getting a foundation, if you just skim a textbook, you'll be fine. But if you're talking from an efficiency standpoint, if you are okay with doing it, if you don't particularly hate it, I would highly recommend I think Cure Dolly is one of the big recommended ones nowadays. She wasn't actually really around whenever I started, but just watch her videos, try to get an idea. A better one than I had. You don't have to perfectly understand it. You don't have to perfectly be able to replicate it. Even like Wa and Ga, no beginner actually understands Wa and Ga. I'm gonna just tell you that right now. So don't feel like you have to. Even intermediate people usually they don't fully get it. So don't feel like you have to perfectly get it, but you want a good foundation for what I'm going to talk about next, and that is the struggles of getting into reading. So the biggest struggle getting into reading is what I would consider, I think there's an actual word for it, but if you have a knot, right, you can untie the knot without too much of an issue, usually. But if you have 2 knots, it becomes slightly more difficult. But if you have 4 knots, 5 knots, 6 knots all jumbled together, it's suddenly a lot more difficult than just untying 7 separate knots or 6 separate knots. When they're all together and overlapping, shit gets complicated. And unraveling Japanese sentences, it's the same exact way. When you have one unknown word in a sentence, it's not too bad. Usually you just look it up and you got it. When you have 2 unknown words in a sentence, it might be a bit more difficult than just looking up 2 unknown words, because now you have to not only look up those 2 unknown words, but maybe if they're side by side, it may be hard to parse them. Maybe, God, what's a good example? Nai maze, maybe. Begins with nai, right? So maybe if it's in a situation something like ga nai maze, you might think it's ga nai, and then it's maze. You may have trouble parsing when there's 2 unknown words that are maybe close together or something. Or maybe you may have trouble understanding how they interact with each other. And then when you have unknown words with unknown grammar, then again, it's that knot problem. It gets harder and harder to understand what you don't even know. It gets harder and harder to understand what you need to look up to understand the sentence in the first place. And more than words, grammar contributes to that knot problem, in my experience. Grammar is usually the more tough one to look up. Words, you can always just search it. Even Yomi-chan will tell you that if it's a conjugation, it'll still be able to find it, for the most part. But grammar, some grammar, you can have a hard time finding. So I think having a good foundation where you have to worry about less of those knots is not a bad idea. So I think if you're going to get into reading, at least have a solid idea on N5 grammar. And that's not a high bar, because I'm not asking you to even be able to perfectly replicate N5 grammar. I'm just saying, be good enough with it to be able to recognize it when you see it. And that's really that's all it takes, I think, to get into reading. Obviously you can do it with less. I did, but I wouldn't recommend it. And then, so getting into reading as well. So why did I stop reading Yotsbato? The biggest reason was because it wasn't really fun. It wasn't too enjoyable. And I just wasn't happy reading it. I had learned a lot from it, don't get me wrong, but it just wasn't what I wanted to be doing. So I switched over to a visual novel, which, looking back, Hoshiori Yume Mirai is it's pretty middle ground for difficulty in terms of like a light novel or a visual novel. By the way, I would say light novels and visual novels are pretty close in difficulty in terms of like similar genres, like a slice of life visual novel and a slice of life light novel covering the same topics is going to be roughly the same difficulty. And I know people might think visual novels are easier because they're like games, but usually the text complexity is pretty comparable. So I switched over to that, which is really difficult for someone who has like barely N5 grammar and like doesn't know like any words. But I enjoyed it, and I had a blast reading that. Like, I sucked at it, but I had a blast. And most importantly, I actually learned a lot. And it may be weird because I learned N2 and N1 grammar points before I learned some N5 grammar points. But I maybe learned it before I even learned to conjugate a verb in the te form. But you need it all eventually anyway. And it all came in handy. And the point was, I just learned from it. So punching above your weight is by no means a bad thing. And the reason why it's not a bad thing is because your goal is just to find stuff you don't know. And it is true that with the not problem, if there's too much you don't know in a single sentence, you're not going to be able to understand it. But if there's not that much, but in a visual novel, there's so many sentences that you're destined to find countless sentences that are I+1, right? Even if the visual novel as a whole is above your weight, finding a single one that isn't, finding a single sentence that isn't above your weight is surprisingly easy. And it just takes a mindset of, okay, I am okay with not understanding what this sentence means. I just need to move on to the next one. Hold on. Sorry about that. So a really important part of reading is just knowing when to move on and being okay, I don't understand the sentence. It's beyond my reach. It's not worth Googling for an hour to try and figure out the answer to it. Just move on. And I think if you have that skill and you have the persistence to deal with a lot of sentences you don't understand, punching above your weight and reading something difficult is perfectly fine. At the end of the day, even though it is far, far, far above your weight, everything in that visual novel was something I had to learn eventually. It was all useful stuff. It's not like I was reading some Muramasa or something really difficult that would have stuff I wouldn't see again for 2 more years or 3 more years. Pretty much all this stuff in there came in handy relatively quickly thereafter. So there is value to learning it. Even if it wasn't in the optimal order, even if it wasn't the most common word I could have came across, or most common grammar point I could have come across, it was all the stuff that was worth learning. So that was my opinion on getting started in reading. And then, so obviously I did Wanikani, and this is probably going to be the most controversial topic of the video. because I'm going to be posting this on Wanikani forums. But my opinion of Wanikani. So obviously I finished Wanikani. And by finish, I mean I did all but the last 5 levels. But yeah, so looking back, so whenever I first finished Wanikani, whenever I was going through Wanikani, I thought Wanikani was fantastic. I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought I was learning so much, and I was going to be a boss at reading whenever I finished it. But the world is not that kind, unfortunately. It was a big struggle to read after finishing Wanikani, and I realized that was not necessarily a fault of Wanikani. That was a fault of my expectations. I had heard that if you learn all the Joyo kanji, you'll be set for reading. No, you're not. You need probably closer to 3,000 to be able to recognize closer to 3,000. It's just at least in the upper 2,000s. It's not the 2,136. And there's plenty of Joyo kanji. There's a handful that you won't even see while you read in the first place. There's plenty. I don't think. Like maybe a handful I don't think I've ever seen in my life while reading. So yeah, I had a lot of wrong expectations when I was getting into Japanese, and I'm 100% certain that a lot of the people who have just hit level 60 or about to hit level 60 or just started have similar misconceptions as well. I mean, that's just how it is, It's such a vast topic that you can't know everything. So what I eventually came to realize, though, was that Wanikani is a trade-off. It's a one giant trade-off, essentially. And the trade-off is that you're essentially reducing your efficiency, you're reducing your ability to improve your Japanese as a trade-off for structure, essentially. So you're opting to go slower. You're opting to kind of take a detour in your path to literacy in exchange for you not really having to think about what to do. All you have to do is log onto the site, do the lessons it tells you to do, and do the SRS whenever it tells you to do it, and do that for like a year. And you'll pop in one side, pop out the other side, and you'll have made great progress. And that's true. You will have made a lot of progress. But I think Wanikani gets the wrong praise. It gets praise for being quick, like, ooh, yeah, I learned all these super fast from Wanikani. Like, I would have never been able to do this without Wanikani. And that is probably true for a lot of people who need the structure. If you need the structure, Wanikani is for you. But make no mistake, it is definitely 100% slower than doing the alternative if you can. So what is the alternative? The alternative is basically what I see a lot of people on like the DJT doing. Not that I'm necessarily affiliated with the DJT or condone anything they do or say, but I think they've got the idea when it comes to learning Japanese for sure. Essentially, I think you really only need to learn a couple that, like, they do like the core 2.1K usually, and I recommend that too nowadays. Core 2.1K, which is like a refined version. It's a very refined version of the core deck. And watch some grammar videos and then just hop into a visual novel. So get a better basis on grammar than I did, and learn to like 2,100 words that are going to appear, like that are very useful, highly valuable words, and jump right into reading. That's the alternative. And that is without a doubt quicker, in my opinion. So a few things to note. So like Wanikani has you learning kanji, but I would argue you don't actually really learn kanji to much of an extent on Wanikani. I think the term learning is very it has kind of two meanings, right? I think you're more familiarizing yourself with the kanji. You're learning things about the kanji, like, oh, it's usually this definition, it's usually this onyomi reading. But knowing a kanji isn't as simple as just knowing, like just having learned a couple things about it. It's a lot more complicated. Even if you see a word that has two kanji that you know, it doesn't necessarily amount to anything other than the fact that you can probably look up, that you can guaranteed look up that word easier. That's the only thing it guarantees. And you don't have to learn those kanji outside of the word. You can definitely just learn the word and the kanji together as one component. And your brain will kind of naturally sort out, oh, this is probably the onyomi, this is a kunyomi. This is what it looks like in a jukugo, this is what it looks like when it's okurigane as like a verb or something. You can naturally sort that out. Learning words from a list in general, and like my core 10K and my wanikani. If I were to say I have any regret in my entire time learning Japanese, it would have been learning those words. Learning nearly 8,000 words from a list was probably the biggest embarrassment of my Japanese journey. I know that it'll probably come as a shock to some people, but looking back, there is no way in hell I would ever do that again. And the reason is simple. The words that you need to know, there's two reasons. The amount of words that you need to know is pretty fixed in the long term, right? If you're going to read across a lot of genres, whatever, it's fixed. But within a single confined genre, and even within a confined piece of work, there are a specific subset of words that are going to be more common than they might be across all genres. For example, if you're reading something at school, or in a school setting, the word hokago might be, excuse my pitch accent, is going to be more common than if you did all the words across all newspapers and whatever. If you didn't know hokago, it means after school, by the way. So it's going to be more common, right? So there is no reason to put off learning that word for another word that appears so often in newspapers that never appears in your actual book, right? It's common sense, but what is a common word is highly, highly context dependent. What is a rare word is highly context dependent. And it makes sense to learn the common words first, for obvious reasons. Remember that knot problem? If you're coming across a word 10 times in a book and you don't know it, and if you don't know it in those 10 instances, that one word is 10 knots in your entire experience reading that book. If you do know it, learning that one word untied 10 knots for you, right? Someone keeps sending me messages. I apologize if you can't do that. So, it makes sense to learn common words first. How are you going to know which words are common? Not by picking them from lists. The core 2.1K is an exception. There are some words that you're going to see no matter what. Like watashi, come on, bro. Like, yeah, you're going to see it no matter what the hell you read. Like heya, okay, you're probably going to, anything that has a room in it, in the setting, is probably going to use heya. Hito, okay, whatever. So there are some words that are absolutely necessary, but apart from those, highly context dependent. And in addition to that, how you learn the words matters, because words are used in a lot of different ways. Words are used in a lot of different ways. They have nuance to them. They have times they're used in certain situations, and they have certain uses in Japanese that don't necessarily correlate to English. Like we may be able to use make, like they may say like kanjo tsukuru, like for to, like we don't say to make a girlfriend, but like they can. But we say to get, but you wouldn't say like eru for that, or like morao or something. So like you have to know like how words are used, and you have to understand like how words are used in ways that differ from English. And all this it's not going to enter your brain through learning it from a list. So in a lot of cases, unfortunately, you will learn a word from a list, and you'll be kind of half guessing whenever you see it in context, because it's not going to be in a way that you anticipated or a way that you would have guessed from your prior knowledge. Sorry about that. There was someone at my door. But yeah, so there's a lot of value to learning words outside of a list, right? And in context. And people beat this dead horse so much. And you got to learn words outside of context. You got to learn words or inside of context, in context, in context, in context. But it actually matters. They're saying it for a reason. And it's kind of exaggerated to some extent, I think. But it's true. I think for a lot of nouns, it doesn't really matter. But for verbs and stuff, there's a difference. And while I'm talking about this, this is what I was going to talk about next, kind of. But words that are, how would you say? They have like 20 definitions for in English. For like if you look up in a bilingual dictionary, right? Like deru, kakeru is probably one of them. Like there's just a handful of words that they just seem like they just have a ton of meanings. Like it can mean anything. It's crazy. And I think that is particularly tough for people who learn words in lists. People who learn words out of lists might not have such an issue. Because one thing I realize is like kakeru, deru, like all these words that have like 20 definitions, they don't actually have 20 definitions. They have 20 definitions, but the word itself is confined to a much smaller idea. It's not actually as widespread of a idea as it might seem. It's just that we don't have a nice word or few words that fits into those ideas across all those different contexts, right? So it's the idea of deru and the idea of kakeru really boils down to a couple different things. It's just that when you apply those things to certain contexts in English, you can't use the same word. So you have to use one word for this context, 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 whatever. And the same applies for going from English to Japanese, of course, but that's just how language works. And I think if you're learning in context, that'll be a lot more apparent to you. It's just, it's just how the word works. It's not necessarily a definition thing. It's not a memorizing the definition thing. It's seeing how the word actually functions within a sentence, or what it actually means, and kind of drawing that connection yourself. But if you never actually see that word in a sentence, well, you're kind of out of luck. So apart from those words, a lot of words that I thought would be very tough were compound words, like omoikomu, tsukekomu, like yarinaosu, anything that uses like an auxiliary verb or like, yeah. And what else? Words with like a lot of alternate definitions, and a lot of different like grammar usages, like need, like the need particle. Again, you think like it feels like it can be used a few different ways. Like I see, but like boiling it down, I don't think that's true. The only thing that really was actually difficult was compounds. That did take me a couple years. Like you just got to learn a bunch of words for that. If I'm being honest, there's just a lot of words that are compounds. Those are tough. But like grammar with different definitions, like I remember thinking like, oh wow, you can use ni in this way, and you can use ni in this way. You can use ni like this with hoshi, And you can use like ni when like something's happening to you. It's like the passive. And you can use ni as like and too. Like there's like so many different ways you can use ni. But if you ask me nowadays, like, yeah, there's like 2 ways to use ni. Yeah, maybe like 2. If you ask me about wa, be like, maybe like 2 ways. And I heard a thing recently that kind of like I think is very true. It's like if you ask a beginner how to use like how many different usages a grammar point has, like they'll know 2. If you ask an intermediate learner, they'll know 10. If you ask an advanced learner, they'll know 2. It kind of sounds like a joke, like, oh, they're forgetting it. But they're not forgetting it. They're just realizing that a lot of that kind of fits together under one broad category. And they kind of develop a sense for the grammar and its usages rather than dividing them into little bitty categories. So I think it's very easy for people to get overwhelmed whenever they're learning these and they see all these unknown words, all these different ways to use a grammar. And let me tell you, there isn't a bunch of ways to use, like, there isn't a bunch of definitions for the word. There isn't a bunch of different, like, things for ni that you have to learn. There's a bunch of things for to you have to learn. It just feels that way because you're not used to the way Japanese is organized. That's all. You're not unaccustomed to the words and grammar. I mean, you are, but it's that you're unaccustomed to the language and you're unaccustomed to how they organize their ideas and like kind of separate it into the little bins that are words, right? And the ideas that you put into a certain bin, the ideas that you associate with a certain word might change from language to language, right? They may have 2 concepts in the same bin that we don't, and it can be confusing. And it can give you the impression there's a lot to learn when there's actually like not. I mean, there is a lot to learn, but not nearly as much as you might expect. So don't sweat it too much is what I'm trying to say. It will all clear itself up very, very quickly. Very, very quickly over the course of 3 years. 5,000 hours. Oh, that's a joke. So yeah. It is a joke though because it's not quickly at all. Looking back, it's like time flies, right? But when you're getting serious going into books, you're going to be presented with the issue of what do you learn? And this is kind of what I talked about with Ningen Shikaku, like what did I choose to learn? And the simple solution is that you need to learn the words that appear the most. That simple as that. Don't learn the word that appears once in the book. Learn the word that appears 10 times first, and then learn the word that appears once. That's the optimal way to do it, but it's a lot easier said than done. Like, how do you actually know what word appears once? Like, how do you know if you're just starting? Like, every unknown word is just an unknown word to you. Like, you might be able to go off of how easy it looks, like the difficulty it looks like. But even for words like chimimorio, like it looks a lot harder than that. Than the frequency might suggest it is, right? It's a lot more common than you might suspect. And some words look very simple, but people never use them. So it's very hard to get into like just a guess in for how often are you going to see this word. Those were 2 things coming in handy. One thing, what I use, flow, kohi. By all means, I mean, unlike wanikani, I don't really regret using kohi. Or flow at the time. I mean, you could say it is words from lists, but obviously those lists were generated from books I was reading alongside adding them, right? So I was really adding the words that I was reading as I came across them. It was just nicely pre-prepared, right? So I didn't have to worry about learning words that I wasn't going to come across, and I knew exactly how much I was going to come across them. The other thing you can do is frequency dictionaries. So if you're going to read visual novels, get a visual novel frequency dictionary and add it to your Yomi-chan, and you get an idea for how much you're going to see a word. It's not perfect, within a single work, the frequency might change, but it'll give you a general idea, and that's all that's important. Let me move my drinks out of the way. And that's the other best way to go about it. And so the way I didn't learn some words in Ningen Chikaku, now that we're on this topic, is I had a novel frequency dictionary and a visual novel frequency dictionary. So there's like a few hundred novels and a few hundred visual novels maybe. And alternatively, if it didn't show up in the frequency dictionary, that means it never showed up in like several hundreds of pieces of work. So if it, in this case, if it didn't show up in any single piece of work, I took it as meaning it was an outdated term. Didn't learn it. So that's how I went about it. But yeah, so learning frequent words first is very important because it's super overwhelming whenever you're starting out, and that's how it should be. If it's not overwhelming for you at the start, you're probably ignoring a lot of words that you think you know, but you actually don't know. You think you know this word, but you actually don't know how it's read, or you think you know the definition, but it's actually using a different definition in this case that you're not aware of. And yeah, so you might think that you're able to guess what all these compounds mean, but you don't know until you look it up. And if you do look it up, if you do really try to see if you know them, know them, if you're just starting reading, you will come, even if you finish Wanikani, especially if you finish Wanikani. Again, I came across 1,200 something in my first book that are frequency 2. There will be so many. There's so many words that you have to learn. It's crazy. And you just have to start chipping away at it from common to most common as best you can. And yeah, so I thought at around the 80% unique words known point. Unique, not total words. Total words, 80% is jack shit. You think unique 80% is more than total 95%, to put in perspective. It's you need to know more than a total of 95% of the total words. And unique means it shows up. So even if watashi shows up 10 times in a sentence, let's say you have the sentence, it's not an actual sentence, but watashi watashi heiya watashi. It's watashi watashi heiya watashi, whatever. So those are the 4 words in a sentence, right? Apart from all your grammar. You have 2 unique words, 4 total words. Watashi watashi heiya watashi. Your 2 unique words are heiya and watashi. So 80% of unique words known is a very nice breakthrough point. And how it kind of works out number-wise is that's a bit more than 95% of the total words, if I remember correctly. Just with how the frequency usually works out in a novel. So it's a tall order. That 80% is for hitting surface. It's breaking through the surface of the water and not feeling like you're drowning anymore, in my opinion. Different people have different tolerances, I should say. Some people wouldn't even be able to tolerate that. Some people would be able to tolerate it long before that. It depends on you. And that's kind of what I experienced. I know Ryan has a similar idea. So I know it's not just me. But that's what you need to feel like you break through. And it takes a while to get there. After Wanikani, took me adding maybe 4,000 words to get there. If you count the core ones. So maybe more like 3,000 after finishing Wanikani. And 20 words a day, that's almost half a year. It's crazy. That's to break through the surface and not feel like you're just overwhelmed when you're reading a novel. So, with that being said, okay, the general reflection. How do you read? And one big thing is I know people ask how often should I look up words? I looked up pretty much every single word I came across I didn't know I looked up, just because I wanted to. You don't have to do that, honestly. If it's not one of your frequency 2 words, if you're doing kohei and it's not one of your frequency 2 words and you can kind of get it from context and you don't want to look it up, You don't have to, because you know it's a frequency one word. You know you're not going to need it immediately, like for the book again, right? You don't have to look it up if you don't want to. If you can guess it, you don't have to feel like you have to. But I did just because I wanted to. And realistically, I don't think I really remembered many of the words I looked up anyway. But it helped me get a better idea for the sentence, of course, and maybe like it helped me get an idea for what was going on a bit better. Because better than guessing, it allowed me to know what I was dealing with, and maybe sometimes I was wrong with my guess, because that is something that happens. Even if we feel like we can guess it because of kanji, we can guess it because of context. Sometimes we're just wrong. But like when you're reading a book, the what you need to know is you're not reading the book to be done with it. In English, like we just want to like enjoy the story and we're done. When you're doing it to read, though, your goal is to like understand things that you couldn't understand before, right? Your goal is to grow as a learner when you read your book. So you're not doing yourself any favor by blasting through it and just white noising half of it. And I finished a book. I read all these pages. And you got the gist of half of it, and half of what you think you know was actually wrong. Like, no. Your goal is to acquire knowledge that will serve your future fluent self well. So you're not doing yourself any favors by basically glossing over the things that book can teach you. Because that's what a book is at the end of the day from a learner's perspective. It's like just an encyclopedia of things to learn, right? It's like a collection, it's like a piece, it's a fragment of like the collective knowledge of whoever wrote it, right? It's all like the natural, because it's going to be grammatically correct Japanese, right? It's stuff from a Japanese person's brain on the paper. It's grammatically correct Japanese, uses words correctly, and you want to try and like drill some of that stuff into your brain. Okay, you can use wa like this. Okay, you can use isoro like this. Okay, you use this verb with that. Okay, this verb means that. That's your goal. Like the point is again to go in and understand stuff that you couldn't at the start and like break it down and comprehend it. Either by looking it up, get it from context, whatever. Your goal is to end the book knowing things that you at the start of the book didn't know. That's it. So really, it doesn't matter how many books you finish at the end of the day, right? It's correlated to the important thing, but how many books you finish isn't the goal. The goal is how much you learn. And I think a lot of people get this backwards because they see a lot of more experienced users like tracking the amount of books they read, right? But like experienced users, like it's all under like, what do you say, like the pretext? It's like everyone knows that that's under the assumption that you're reading to learn, as long as it's not like extensive reading that you're just reading for fun, whatever. And when it is extensive reading, like they usually mark it like, oh, I was reading through it for fun. And again, it's the quantity is correlated, and everyone like has this like mutual understanding of that. But it's up to you to understand that, okay, like that's what we see on the surface, but everyone below the surface is actually trying to understand what they're reading. And you need to do that too, right? Everyone's not just reading all these books just to get through them. Everyone's reading them to understand everything, like, and learn stuff, right? So I don't want you to make that mistake, right? When you see people, how would I say this? Like take the extensive reading challenge, for example. Like when you see people posting on the extensive reading challenge, their goal isn't just to get through the book. I mean, you still want comprehension, right? Even though you don't see the struggle that other people do when they read. Like all you see is I finished this visual novel. I finished this book. You don't act like there's no way for you to know the struggle that they put in, right? There is no way for anyone to ever know the struggle that I put in when I read my first visual novel. It was fucking hard. And it was tough, but all you see is, oh yeah, I read this visual novel. But what that really means is I spent countless hours looking up words. I spent countless hours Googling grammar points, doing this, doing that, trying to rack my brain, asking people for explanations. That's what it really means. And that's the important part. That's what it really means. Even though you don't see it on the surface when I say, oh yeah, I just read this visual novel. That's the implication. So again, the goal isn't just to finish it. The goal is to do, again, what it implies, which is you're trying to learn a lot of stuff. And if you just white noise it, if you just gloss over it and skip over stuff, you're not doing yourself any justices. Okay. So the turning point. I said that you, 80% is breaking through water when you're drowning, just coming to the surface. And then the big turning point for me was learning all frequency one, every word I came across, I could learn, that point. And having that as an option felt, that was a big breakthrough. So when you're learning, you're going to hit, people call what they think is the intermediate plateau a lot. But what I want to emphasize is you're going to slowly, what your perceived progress is going to slow down no matter what. So for you, the past 5 months of your journey is always going to be what felt like the slowest 5 months. So long as you've had no recent breakthrough, you just started talking to Japanese people for the first time ever and you're able to see yourself improve speaking. If you've had no breakthrough, it's always going to feel like you're just slowing down. And people call it, this is the intermediate plateau. This is the intermediate plateau, whatever. I think all that's kind of wrong. I don't think that's actually the intermediate plateau. And maybe people who've gotten to this point can agree with me or disagree with me. But I think the real intermediate plateau is something much further down the road because people don't realize how bad they are. Again, remember I said earlier how your perception of how easy Japanese is going to be is always misconstrued at the start. It's going to be misconstrued for a while, if I'm being honest. And it may sound, I don't want to sound like I'm discrediting your opinion, but if you're not an experienced reader, I would say, it's very hard to realize how much it takes because it's you feel like you're making progress, and then like I said earlier, I hit a point where it was the words just kept appearing. It didn't feel like the amount of words that would just appear once would shrink. It was just the same. So it was it's you're running down towards a tunnel, the end of a tunnel, and you're oh yeah, I'm halfway there. But then all of a sudden you realize the end of the tunnel is not actually getting closer. It's almost like it's an optical illusion. You're still running, and you're oh yeah, at this rate I'll be there in 10 minutes. But then 5 minutes later you're wait, it still looks like it's about 10 minutes away. So what's the deal? And you kind of realize that you had a misconstrued view of the end. And when you have a misconstrued view of the end, you can have a misconstrued view of where you're at in relation to the end. Halfway there, quarter way there, whatever. I think the real halfway point is, I think the end of the halfway point is being able to add every single word. Before you get there, you'll feel kind of like you're drowning again. It's you're adding all these words, but there's just more words that appear once that just keep popping up. And it's like, well, do I even bother worrying? Like it feels like they're not useful, but they are. Because the issue with uncommon words is like infrequency one words in general is like an uncommon word itself is a common occurrence. Like you can expect to see in a single book like a 1,000, depending on your definition, 1,000 like uncommon words or so, maybe more. Like those are words that you may not see for another few books, right? 1,000 in a single book. But each individual one of those you may not see for a while. But every word just uses so many different words that there's going to be like 1,000 of them in there. And they're like a necessity. And you're not gonna, you have to just take the dive to surmount that wall at some point. But getting to the point where you can just, to where it's like manageable to just learn all the words you come across is a long stretch. It's a very long and slow stretch, it felt like. And I feel like that's the intermediate plateau. Like where you can read just well enough to where it feels like all the words you don't know just are uncommon, but you can't learn all of them. Like it's just too much to learn all of them from one book. And I got to that point, I would say, after reading like 20 books or so. And again, I was adding like 20 words a day per book. 20 words a day, yeah. So it was maybe, I'd SRS like, I don't even know, 15,000 words at that point, or maybe. It's far down the road. So if you're just getting into manga and you feel like you're struggling, I hate to break it to you, but it like there's another like a much harder stretch down the road. You're just at the normal stretch, but once you get to that stretch, and you finally make that turn, it almost feels like it gets too easy, because it's like a lot of the words you learn magically somehow appear, even though they're supposed to be uncommon. The sheer number of them makes it to where you're always going to see some. Like for example, it's like Daikoku Bashira was one I feel like is uncommon. It's just not something you see every book. And I had to learn it at one point. I'm like, whatever. Just saw it right before I started making this video. Just popped up in a casual conversation in a visual novel I was reading. And again, that's just one of like several thousand uncommon words I've learned, and it's a numbers game. But once you have enough of those common words learned, it just starts filling in the gaps, and it starts filling in the gaps. And you go from once you go from like learning one new word per page, filling in a couple of those gaps may mean that you can now go 2 whole pages without seeing a single new word in a book. And it starts feeling so liberating because you just see those gaps. Like it just starts making these patches of just long strings of text that you can just get everything from. And it's very liberating. It's like, just hang in there. It'll come eventually. I know it feels like it'll never come, but it will. And that's where I felt like I could start to see the end. Maybe not at that point, but after I had started doing that for like a few thousand words, like nowadays, like whenever it's like I can add like a couple dozen words from a book I don't know, it's like I feel like, okay, if like especially looking it up on jpdb.io, where it's like I can see all those words that I didn't know appeared somewhere in like another piece of work I had heard about. So like, okay, if I had read that other piece of work before reading this one, I would have added that word. And I would have known it when I came across it here. So it's like all these are very possible that I would have known it depending on what I read beforehand. So it's like, wow, if I just read enough, if I just add enough, I'll get there one day. So it's very liberating. I mean, not even Japanese people know every single word they come across. So, yeah. So yeah, to get there, or wait, sorry. Getting there, a lot of the frequency one words, I will say, are, how would I say this? They're frequency one words within a certain genre maybe, or by a certain author maybe. But you might find, like, for example, Daikoku Bashira. Like, I've only seen it, like, Daikoku Bashira in, like, a few works where it appears once, like, in the book. Like, again, it's something you'll see every now and then, but, like, it's always been something I've only seen, like, once in a book or twice. Like, I don't think I've ever seen it twice in the same book. And I think one thing that you can do to kind of, like, not turbocharge, that's, like, such a cliche word. But one thing you can do, like, boost your ability to acquire new words is reading across different authors in different genres. Because what I realize is one word that might be used once per book by a certain author or in a certain genre could appear, like, could be something that you would expect to see, like, 7 times, 8 times in the right genre, or in by the right author. Like, even just using, like, kanji as an example, like yoyaku. Yoyaku written in kanji is something that you like everyone will come across at one point, but some authors just don't use it. It's like you'll just never see it, but if you pick the right author who just uses it, you can see it, like, 10 times per book. Or, like, a word like God, what's, like, a military example? I mean, like, okay, like, Gekkokujo. I think it's also in the title of, like, a famous, like, the bookworm, whatever, Ascension of a Bookworm book. But Gekkokujo, I have only seen it, like, frequency one words. Like, it appears, I've seen it, like, how would I say, like, a handful of times. Until recently. Like, I'm reading a military style book, like a book that has a military setting, and that is, like, a big theme in the book. And I probably see that word, like, 10 times, 20 times per each book. So before, it was this uncommon frequency 1 word, and now it's this super common frequency 10, frequency 20 word. So by jumping across genres and jumping across authors, you kind of take advantage of the fact of what I said earlier about how frequent a word is highly context dependent. You're basically switching your context to make those words that you want to learn, that you still have to learn, more common. Because it's a lot easier to learn a word when you see it 10 times in a book than when you see it once. Not to mention that even if, not only is it easier to learn, but you get a better feel for it, right? So switching authors and genres is a very important thing. But at the start, I recommend the opposite. I recommend you stick to a single author. Because your goal isn't to... You have enough words, enough common words that you need to learn already. So why not stick to a single genre, a single author that uses those same common words, so you can get those as a good foundation. So when you're starting out, I recommend stick to a single author, stick to a single genre. If you're getting towards my level, where you are learning every single word, and you're looking for, like, new words to learn, or you want to see those frequency 1 words more often, hop genres as much as you can, hop authors as much as you can. Yeah, okay. And so that's everything I want to say in terms of general reflection and advice. I did do this whole thing where I read books from the same author and the same genre at the start, and I think it was a good choice, and I would recommend people do the same. Apart from that, if I didn't forget anything, I'd like to move into general statements then, I guess. So, 2 things that I'm not too sure if I should add this. I wasn't too sure if I should talk about this, so I'm going to put it at the end, just in case, people don't want to watch, they don't have to. Couple things on So what it takes to become comfortably literate, and what it means when you are comfortably literate. So I think this is another thing people have a misconstrued view on. So remember earlier, I think I may have talked about it, but I think people get used to not knowing words. And that's a good thing. I think you need to have some sort of mental resilience. You don't want to get caught up on every single word you don't know. And even natives don't. But there's 2 humps to it. So the first hump is it's like a kind of like a roller coaster, right? So the first part, you are going to be bothered endlessly by all the words you don't know, because there's going to be so many. Very low tolerance. And it's going to go up. You're going to get a lot of those words down pat, and you're going to be moving into that intermediate level. And you're going to be used to unknown words at this point. Your tolerance is going to be high. You're not going to be coming across as many, and you're going to be used to it. It's not weird for you to come across an unknown word. It's just a part of reading at this point for you. It's just a natural thing. And then you actually get to the point where you start adding every unknown word, right? And you start filling in all those gaps. And then whenever you come across an unknown word, it's a big deal for you. You can't ignore them anymore because you're learning all of them. And it's, like I said, you're going pages without coming across a new word at this point. So when you come across one, it's like a break in your focus. You're like, oh, there's a word I gotta learn. And then, so that's kind of where I'm at right now. And then my prediction is that you finally have one final raise in the tolerance where you end up like a native. And it's pretty much every word. And the words you don't know, you can get from context. And they don't bother you when you come across a word you don't know, because you're not in the mindset that you have to learn them. You've gotten to a high literacy level. The words you don't know, it's kind of like whatever. It goes in one ear, out the other. You get the idea, get it from context, whatever, scan the whole page, and you're done. So there's 2 points in your study where you are tolerant of unknown words and you feel comfortable being around them. But they are very different. One of them is comparable to that of a native. The other one is just essentially, if I put it very bluntly, it's you getting used to sucking at Japanese. So both of them are comfortable for very different reasons. One of them you're bad, one of them you're not. I think people, when they think about what it means to be able to comfortably read books, at the start, they envision that last one. They envision being able to pick up a book off the shelf, no dictionary, just be able to read through it and get it. And it's fantastic. But when people start learning, I think they get to that first hump and they're finally able to read a book and not feel uncomfortable. It doesn't feel painful learning it or reading it anymore. And they need to rely on a dictionary. They don't get everything. And not that that's a bad thing, but they don't get everything. They need to rely on a dictionary. They work through it really slowly. But it doesn't suck. And I think they mistake that for comfortable reading. Because it is comfortable. Like I said, you get used to, that being coming across unknown words like that. You get used to the ambiguity to some extent. But I think that's definitely not what I would consider comfortably literate. I would consider that being closer to being comfortable with your level of literacy. But not being comfortably literate in the sense that you can comfortably read a book. It's that you can be comfortable with your inability to read a book and you're okay with relying on dictionaries and stuff. But natives don't rely on dictionaries, do they? No, they read through it. They're able to get the words they don't know with context and not be bothered by it because it's to such a small extent. That's a very different thing. And I think that this view can kind of misconstrue people's opinions of what it means to be literate. And I think one argument that gets brought up is like, oh, well, the point is just to have fun, right? I mean, you're just supposed to have fun while reading. And so it's like, if you can enjoy what you're reading, aren't you? I mean, you're basically literate, right? You're enjoying what you're reading. You're able to get enjoyment from it. But my argument to that was, in my very first visual novel, where I absolutely sucked ass, I had a blast doing it. Like, I had so much fun reading that visual novel. I kind of wish I could go back to that time, part of me, as weird as that may sound. I kind of wish I could suck that much again. And, does that mean I was literate? No. I was just having a good time. But I wasn't literate. And it's a very distinguished line, I think. When you can pick up, when you can pick up a book and read it just pick up a book off the shelf and read it and understand it, it's you realize that up until now you've kind of set your expectations a bit lower than you initially had envisioned, I think. I was being shown around the library at my school, and one of the teachers was like, well, can you read this? And she handed me Shika no O. And so I opened it up, and I just opened up to a random page and tried to read it. It was a textbook. I couldn't use Yomi-chan. It was a physical book. But, I mean, I could read it. And I realized, that's the expectation. That's what the vision we have in our mind. You take a book, you read it, you understand it. Not you take a book and you can utilize the tools on the internet and stuff to allow you to understand most of it. Very different. You're still reading in that latter case. You're absolutely still reading. I don't want to take away from what you're achieving. But I don't think it's comparable. I think it's a different thing that you've achieved than comfortable literacy. What it really takes to become comfortably literate, that first example where you pick something up off the shelf and just read it, understand all of it, takes a lot of work. I'll be honest, it takes a lot of work. I'm there for some genre. I'm not even there for all genres, dude. I think to be there across all genres, 10,000 plus hours, probably. I don't even know. Maybe a bit less. I don't know. But it's a lot. And that's for reading. That's not even that's not including speaking or listening. That's just reading. But I mean, that's a near native level, and that's just what it takes. But I will say, and I don't want this to come across in the wrong way, but even if you get there, I don't think there is a prize at the end of the tunnel. I'll be entirely honest. I don't think there is. I told you recently I read my last book with 9 unknown words, so I felt I was able to read through it, right? 9 unknown words in the whole book. I was able to read through it. I was able to enjoy it. Feeling you kind of imagine, I think you have a misconstrued view of what it feels like at the start. You're like, oh yeah, that'd be so awesome. But when you get to that point, it's not awesome anymore. It's normal. It's literally normal. You don't wake up in the morning holy shit, I can read Japanese, bro. No, because it's a gradual thing that happened over several years. You don't think twice of the fact that you can read Japanese. You couldn't imagine not being able to read Japanese, right? So it's not you are yeah, holy, wow, so glad I did that. You don't feel oh my god, wow, this was so worth it. You just don't. There is no prize, and the prize is, as stupid and cliche as this will sound, I'm going to be entirely honest. The prize is the fun you had along the way. That's it. For speaking and stuff, I think there's more of a prize, honestly. Being able to communicate with my coworkers in Japanese is it's something that I otherwise might not have been able to do, and it's connections, it's relationships that I can make that otherwise I wouldn't be able to do. But for reading, I mean, translated works aren't are like worse in my opinion. And I would never read a translated work over a base work like the Gensoku. What do you call Gensoku? Original. But I would, I wouldn't ever read a translated work over the original. But part of that's because I just want to learn. I want to read it in the original, but like the actual work is not that much different. I don't think, and it's definitely not better enough to justify several thousand hours of learning, right? Especially because you're going to read it slower in the original anyway. You're going to read it slower. You may miss something. Even things like Bakemonogatari, which I felt like had a lot of value in the writing itself. Like, it was definitely noticeably better than the original, than the translated version. But like, it's not worth the 7,000 hours or 8,000 hours or whatever. It's not worth it. The only reason why I would do all this over again in a heartbeat is because genuinely, while learning, those 7,000 hours were like so fun. Like, I just love it. It's so fun. I had such a great time learning Japanese. So I'm going to be honest. If you don't, and you have dreams of getting to a high level, I think you are in the wrong spot. I don't think Japanese is for you. If you don't truly enjoy learning it, I don't think that you should. If you work here and you need to, go for it. If you have a Japanese spouse and you need to, go for it. But if you're doing it as a hobby, just because, like I said, just because you want to be able to read something and you have your eyes focused on the prize and you don't really enjoy it that much, I think you should move on to something else, because there is no prize. It's by the time you get there, it'll be obvious that you can do it. You won't even think twice about it, and I don't think you'll look back with particularly like oh yeah, this was great return on investment, because it's not really a good return on investment at all. It's just if you enjoy reading those works, and like enjoy studying it, you'll have fun. So it's several thousand hours of fun. It's not several thousand hours of pain that'll be eventually justified by your ability to read Ore no imoto ga konna ni kawai wake ga nai in the original Japanese. It's never going to be worth it. So I would highly recommend, if you are not going to enjoy the 7,000, you're going to drop off somewhere along the way, I can almost guarantee you, unless you have some giant driving force. So just, there's something out there for you that you enjoy doing. If it's not Japanese, it's not Japanese. I know if you've been putting it up on a pedestal, like being able to speak Japanese would be so cool. Let me assure you, it's not. The only people who think it's cool are the people who can't do it. The people who can do it don't really think it's that cool, honestly. Like, as weird as that may sound, like the more because like once you're able to do it, you don't think much of it. Like, I'm sure people who can't ride a bike, like little kids who can't ride a bike, think that riding a bike is so cool. But you never hop on a bike and be like, oh yeah, bro, I'm riding a bike right now. Let's go. No, it's just, what can that do for you? In terms of reading, can't do a whole lot, unless it's directly related to your work. I think, honestly speaking, is able to do a lot more for you. But with that being said, I don't regret it at all. I don't regret doing what I did until now. I don't regret learning everything I did until now, because it's been so fun, and I'm going to continue to learn. I've posted before my shameless, like, I'm going to be better than the average Japanese person, and they probably aren't going to give a shit. I already know they don't give a shit. I can read a lot of stuff that Japanese people, like the average Japanese person, can't already, just because that's how learning words works. They don't really give a shit, but I give a shit. I think it's fun, and I like learning new words. I like learning Tanken-1 words or Kanken-1 kanji that are interesting. So I'm gonna keep doing it. And you need, I'm going to be honest, you need a pretty high level if you're going to be able to read comfortably for like chuny shit. I was kind of blown away. Like, I had never realized how many like kanken, one kanji, and like weird, obscure words that like really chunibyo, like otaku shit would use. It's kind of nuts. So if your goal is to like be able to read things like Fate and Muramasa, like you're gonna need a lot more than just someone who wants to read like rom-com light novels, right? They actually use a lot of freaking weird words in that, and you have to learn them. And it's probably a lot of words that Japanese people might not be able to recognize or read off the top of their head. So I'll go ahead and say right now, because I know a lot of people learning are probably interested in that shit. Your bar is even higher if you want to get to that point. That's just they naturally use more difficult words. They think it's cool. I guess the people writing it think it's cool, or you get builds the atmosphere a lot better or whatever. And they use more complex words. From a learner perspective, if you enjoy learning, it's a gold mine. So again, it's all about your perspective, and I think the people with the right mindset are going to make it. I think a lot of people, they think they enjoy learning more than they actually do, because I'm going to be honest, you might be in a honeymoon phase for like a year, right? And it can be pretty shitty whenever you realize that you're not improving as much as you thought you were, or that it's going to take a lot longer, or you have other things in life that you want to do. So it's tough to stick with it. It's tough. I think people know the dropout rate. If you're around for a while, you'll kind of realize language learning in general is like that. But it's tough. But if you enjoy doing it, just do it, and you'll get there eventually. And it won't even be on your mind when you do. Whenever you get there, you literally won't even be thinking about it. You won't even give a shit. I know. Yeah. It's so weird. By the time you get there, it's like you don't even care anymore. You just want to learn. And it's like you're never good enough. So yeah. So comparison of mediums, by the way, is something else I want to do. Light novels, visual novels, and manga. So my experience, manga, bottom tier. Much easier, much more accessible, has visual aids, doesn't have a great way to like hook text. So if you don't know the word, if it doesn't have furigana, it can be rough looking up kanji and stuff. But overall text complexity, very easy on average compared to the other two. And of course, it will vary context to context. So I'm very much dealing with the average here. You can have very difficult manga. You can have very easy manga. Yeah, you never know. But in terms of average, we're talking a lot easier, and you can't hook the text very easily. Light novels. Light novels is what I primarily read. I would say on average, the word difficulty compared to regular novels is pretty similar. I don't feel like light novels had easier or harder words necessarily. I mean, some light novels do have much more harder words. I think light novels, like the hardest light novel, or like not hardest, but like if you compare like the top 10% of hard light novels and top 10% of hard novels, I think light novels win in terms of words. Just because a lot of chuny shit sits up at the top, and you'll get a lot of words that otherwise you wouldn't. But for writing complexity, I think novels beat it. So like kokuhaku, for example, like I think kokuhaku, again from a word perspective, is a novel, but it's very easy. And then you have other words like oshimoyu, the other one that I've read, kagami no kojo, konbini ningen. I've read some honshin, ningen shikaku. All of them, especially considering ningen shikaku for how old it is, like The word difficulty wasn't bad, especially like Konbini Ningen, Oshimoyu, like all of those are like kind of easy as shit. Um, but the writing is different. So if you're used to light novel writing, it'll be harder. And like usually it's like a less direct. You might have like much longer strings of text. So I think understanding the writing is harder, like the prose, I guess you could say. But the actual words that are used aren't usually that hard. So overall, light novels and novels, they're hard for different reasons, but they're roughly the same. And then visual novels. Visual novels I would compare to actually be pretty similar to light novels. You might think that visual novels are like a game, so they might be easier, but usually they're about the same. I would say across the same genre with similar themes, they cover about similar level of text complexity. They have similar text complexity. And if you are going to pick one of them to learn from, if you don't care, I mean, again, manga is really easy in my opinion. So, like, if you're a beginner, do it. But like, as soon as I hit the intermediate level, I felt like it was like I was coming across not even intermediate, but like past intermediate. Like, maybe by the time I'd read like 20 or so books, 20, 30 books, it was like I was coming across like a couple words per light novel volume or manga volume I didn't know, and it was like it's cool for getting to get a feel for spoken Japanese, but in similar like genres to what you're used to, like I read a lot of rom-com and slice of life just because it's what I'm into. It's just so much easier than light novel. It's like it's too easy if you have experience. So I would say it's okay if you're like starting out, but like I don't think it's a great choice, honestly, for if you have a bit of experience. It's like I would try to graduate up into like light novels and stuff, or visual novels or novels, like as quick as possible. But apart from those, like for those other three, I think visual novels is actually the best. I'm gonna be honest. The reason's simple. I think like there's a lot of bullshit out there. I think about like being a visual learner, right? I think there's a lot of modern research that like there's actually like no such thing as a visual learner. Like everyone kind of just like learns best with like multimodal learning or whatever. Like when you have visual, audio, and like stuff like different things mixed in together. And I think visual novels tackles that really well. Like you can see the text, you can hear it, and you can like have like a visual associated with it. So especially for making cards, it's like super convenient, and yeah, I think it's a good choice. Just for making cards as far as like learning goes, you get to hear the tone associated with it and like everything, like facial expressions, all that. So I think visual novels are definitely superior, but like the most important thing is that you do whatever you want to do. And that's the most important thing in general learning, in my opinion, is that you just read what you want to read. Again, it doesn't matter how much you're punching above your weight. So long as you're reading something that like isn't too easy, like I said, like reading manga is like too easy. Well, reading manga is too easy depending on your level. I think you're fine. Like just read something that'll give you plenty of stuff you don't know, and if you enjoy it, you'll naturally be inclined to read more. And that's really the key at like the end of the day, is that you're reading stuff that you want to read, and you're reading stuff that you're going to be inclined to. Because if you enjoy something, you're naturally going to do it more. And that additional like amount that you're going to do it is always, I feel like, going to trump any small little bump in efficiency. So yeah, like and but yeah, I would recommend, if you can, like Text Hooker or like using the Tsu ebook reader, which I've linked before. Use those, like use Yomi-chan, like make Anki cards. I think SRS is a very valuable tool. And of all the things I've done, like again, I'm very happy I used SRS. Very happy I switched over to Anki. I use the anime card format, basically. I think it's pretty good. Yeah, I would recommend it. And last thing if you are still on Wanikani, learning, and it might be I don't want to say too early for you to watch this video, but like obviously a lot of this stuff will be very far down the road. Like learning every single word in a book might be far down the road. But one thing I'll say like now is like I would set expectations low. I think it's very easy as like a beginner to hype yourself up, and just so we're clear, like I would say like looking back, if you haven't like really read a book yet, I think you're still probably a beginner. If like when you're beginning, it's very easy to hype yourself up and like be like, oh yeah, like especially on one kind of like, oh yeah, I'm learning all these kanji. I have 90% of JLPT and one kanji. I have 99% of what kanji on Wikipedia known. It's very easy to hype yourself up, and I think it's very good to be excited about your progress and all that. But I don't want you to have like a misconstrued frame of reference for like what that actually means. It's like percent kanji known actually really doesn't amount to anything. It's like it really is the only thing it's a guarantee for is like the amount of words that you'll be able to look up that you don't know if they don't have furigana. Right? The amount of kanji you don't know, or the amount of kanji you do know, essentially is rendered useless as some guaranteed figure for some level of ability, because knowing the reading for a kanji isn't the point. The most important thing what you read is your comprehension, and you can't actually ever comprehend a word that you don't know, no matter what kanji it uses, until you've learned the word. Either you've learned it through repeated context exposure, or you've learned it through SRS or whatever. Maybe someone told it to you, you heard it in a conversation one time, and later in the conversation they defined the word. Like in Kokugaku, they had the really long Japanese like kanji string for AIDS, and they said or, and we just can say AIDS. It's like, oh, okay, well now I know what it means. Like there's a lot of different ways to know a word, but if you don't know it, you don't know it. And knowing kanji doesn't guarantee you know it. That's all I'm trying to say. And the goal is to know the word. So anything short of that is a step along the way. And it's a very valuable step if you know how to search a word. It's a lot easier than when you don't know how to search a word and you have to put in the individual radicals on Jisho. So it's absolutely some progress. It's absolutely something of value. But it doesn't mean that you'll be able to read. It doesn't mean that you'll have any sort of level while reading, really. Even percent of words doesn't guarantee anything either. If you know 90% of the words, it doesn't mean you'll know 90% of the sentences. Even if you know 90% of the words, you might not actually get a full single sentence in an entire paragraph, because maybe you're missing the most important word in a sentence. Sometimes you've learned a word and it uses a definition you didn't learn before, and now you're still stuck on that sentence, right? Or maybe it uses it in a way that you didn't understand, or with a grammar that you didn't understand and you didn't get it. It's going to be frustrating, is what I'm trying to say. You can have all these expectations, and you probably will, of things that you'll be able to do. But do not be discouraged whenever you don't live up to those expectations or you realize that it was wrong. It's a natural part. Sucking is just a natural step along the way. And don't feel like you should be able to do anything at any given level. Because if you can't do something, chances are if you get to level 60 and you don't really learn much grammar or whatever, which I don't think most people do even while they learn Wanikani. But you get N4 grammar or something, N3 grammar, and you finish Wanikani, and you're able to only do a little bit. Don't hype don't be like, oh my god, why can't I do this? Dude, if you can't do it, no one else who did that was able to either. Chances are you're not stupid. I'm not a language guru. Other people hit level 60 aren't a language guru. They weren't able to do that shit either. Okay, it's just people when they say, oh, I read through, again, like I said earlier, if they say I read through a manga, or I'm level 60 and I'm getting into reading. That's what you hear, but you're probably not seeing below the surface is just how much they're struggling. Okay, so it's very easy to not see how much people are struggling, and it's kind of easy to hear what they're doing and have a misconstrued view of the efficacy, like not the efficacy, the proficiency at which they're doing it, right? Because again, we go in with as beginners, and we hype ourselves up with these expectations. So when you don't meet those expectations, it's not you being bad. It's you having higher expectations not only for yourself and for other people, right? If you weren't able to do it, chances are other people aren't able to do it if they did the same exact thing that you did, right? You're not just dumb. So don't feel like you're like lagging behind, or don't feel like you're not getting it as well as you should be, right? Or don't feel like, oh, you hit level 16, you're a failure, because you can't read easy manga. Dude, like other people can't either. I guarantee you, it's hilarious. Like there's like kind of this this like word, like it's such a misconstrued view that even I had. Like to put in perspective, looking back, like Wanikani, like getting level 60 alone was like, I think I did the math earlier on like the time it took. It was like in the teens % of my total study. It's like less than a fifth of everything I've done. Getting to level 60. It's a small fragment, and it's okay if you can't do a lot after getting it, or if you don't get it, because again, I don't recommend you use Wanikani in the first place if you're a motivated learner. It's okay, and don't beat yourself up over it. Keep your head down. Just keep having fun, and you'll get there eventually. Everyone, including myself, is going to sound a lot better online than they actually are. Like even I'm guaranteeing people watch this, you think I'm probably better than I actually am. You probably have a view of what I'm able to do, and I'm probably not actually able to do some of the things that you think I am. Because again, it's naturally a lot more easy to describe the things that I can do and the things that I have done than describe the things that I struggle with and the things that I can't do. So I'm able to give you all these numbers, like, oh yeah, I stress all these where I can know I don't know these many words per book. But there's other things that I haven't talked about, like my reading speed. I can't read nearly as fast as a native. I read at like visual novels at like 15,000 characters per hour, and I'm pretty sure like natives can read like double that. Like whenever I put in the autoplay, my autoplay is like below the middle, like the middle speed in the one I'm reading at least. Like, so it takes me time. I can't just zoom through it, Sometimes I forget readings for words. Like I always forget, like, is it kanekiri goe, kanekiri koe, kiroi koe, kiroi goe? Like I forget stuff. Like rendaku sometimes fucks me up, So it's like... And sometimes I have to, when I forget that rendaku, I have to add it back into my Anki deck, and I do it again. I just re-SRS it. So take everything someone tells you about what they can do with a grain of salt. And not that I think they're trying to be dishonest to you. But you're probably overestimating them, is all I'm saying. So don't compare yourself as much. Like do your best to not compare yourself in a productive way. I think if other people are able to like do something, like I think like you should hold yourself to a high standard for sure. And like if other people are doing something and like learning quicker than you, I think if you are a motivated learner, you should seek out efficient ways of learning and like hear other people's ideas. But don't be like, oh, well, I've been learning for 1 year and this guy's been learning for 1 year and he sounds a lot better than me. Sounds like, he can read a lot better than me. Don't... He can't read, or he can't, he can't speak as good as you might think. Maybe he rehearsed what he was speaking before he said it. So just keep that in mind. And, yeah. And also, yeah, I mean... It's a long journey, and if you got your eyes focused on the end the whole time, you're going to have a very, very rough time. Just have fun. Seriously, just have fun. Try to understand as many sentences as you can, and you will look back and you'll be amazed at what you can do. the last thing I want to say was burnout. So I'm saying like do as much as you can. Do like read as much as you can. Like have fun. And people will be like, oh well, if you do too much, you'll be burned out. Like you got to take breaks. You got to do this. I can't remember the last time I took a break in Japanese. Like, can I just say that? Like outside of when I was in Japan speaking, like whenever I was here on vacation, maybe I don't think I did reviews. But like in my past 4 years, I can't remember actually ever being at home and not doing Japanese. And I've never burned out. So why is that? So like if you actually enjoy it, I'm of a firm belief that you can do it for like hours a day if you have the time and not be burnt out. And I'm of the belief that if you enjoy it, you will find the time for it. Even when I was working like close to 70 hours a week with a 1 hour commute, I was able to get in like two hours a day of Japanese, 2.5. And I was able to read like a book every week and add my 20 words a day, over the summer. Well, working that much because I used all my breaks on it. I literally used all my breaks on Japanese. I'd learn it, go home. I would listen to audiobooks while I worked. I would go home, study more Japanese. I would even wake up sometimes at 2 a.m. to do my Japanese. I'd go to bed early. If I was tired that day, rather than do my Japanese while tired, I'd go to sleep and wake up. Like, if you want to do that, like, just do it. I remember people telling me whenever I first started, you can't go full speed. First off, people say some bullshit like you're not going to remember everything. That's totally wrong. But it's like, you're going to get burned out. It's not true. It's not true for everyone. If you enjoy it, why would you get burnt out? And you're going to get no more burnt out than you would watching TV if it's fun for you. So do it. If you want to go hard, dude. More power to you. Honestly, I think it's easier past a certain point to go hard because, like, whenever I was first starting, it was like Japanese time was like a 30-minute chunk of my day, right? Whenever I first started and gave up, it was like a 30-minute chunk of my day. It was like taken out of like video game time and stuff. But then, like, once I went into college and started doing it for like full speed, and I did my grammar and all that, like everything, it just became like a piece of my day. It wasn't like taking out of part of my day. It was part of my day. And it really became part of a habit, and it built in like part of my schedule. And I think that made it a lot easier to do it because it didn't take willpower to stop another task or stop another like video game or to like do something. Or when I was doing something, it didn't take any willpower to stop that and move on. It was just, now it's Japanese time. I have this time that I've set aside for Japanese. It's Japanese time. And yeah, once you do it so much, it becomes part of a habit. You couldn't imagine not doing it. So I think that's something to keep in mind if you want to go hard. And yeah, it's almost 2 hours. Congratulations if you managed to watch it this far. I hope I haven't sounded too much like a downer. I mean to be very realistic in what I say, in that I don't want to mislead you. But it can come across, if you have more optimistic views, it can come across as very disheartening in some cases. And in some cases, I think people straight up should stop learning Japanese. And I mean that in a kind way. I mean in like a way that like there is something better for you. Life is short. Find a hobby that you enjoy. But for the most of this, what I'm really trying to say is that you can definitely do it. It's going to be hard to like make it this far, but any individual day should be easy for you. Like you should enjoy waking up and doing Japanese. The hard part is just sticking with it over 4 years, 5 years, because some hobbies change. Like we lose interest in stuff, but that's not on you, right? That's just how it is. So it's not hard in the sense that like it's a struggle. It's just hard in the sense that the chances are low that your hobbies won't change or your opinion won't change. But if you enjoy learning Japanese every day, if you enjoy waking up every day, then I think you're doing the right thing. If you're not enjoying a book, drop the book, read a different book. It doesn't fucking matter. a book is a book. If you're not enjoying the show you're watching, drop it. Watch a different show. If you want to watch something else, drop it. It doesn't matter. Just do what you want to do, and you'll get there. It's not about the amount of books finished. It's not about the amount of shows watched. It's about how much time you put into it. So maximize your enjoyment, and you'll be maximizing your learning, I would say. Keep the core efficient framework of just input, SRS, SRS, SRS. And you don't even have to SRS if you don't want to. Keep that core framework of just trying to input, and don't just learn shit from lists. And you'll be good. You'll be getting there. I wish you guys all the best of luck on your journey, and I'm definitely not done with mine. From here on out, again, one of my main goals right now is improving reading speed, and just learning a bunch of rare words and having fun with it. So I'll be doing my best, and hopefully you guys are too. So I really like being able to have discussions with other people who've made it to this point, and I hope maybe one day we can have a talk as well about your journey, or whoever's watching this, and I can hear all the things you've been through, all the books you've read, and we can maybe talk about our favorite light novel or something. So best of luck. Wishing you guys well, and have fun. Peace.